So I'm sorry in advance about my shirt. I hope it's not distracting through this whole video because it is pretty sparkly, and as I was, turning on this camera and fixing my lights and stuff like that, I was like, oh man, that's a lot sparklier than I expected it to be. But I mean, it is sequences, so I guess I should have expected that. But yeah, so I really hope that this is not too distracting and blinding you as I'm talking. I will try and keep the blindingness to a minimum, and hopefully it works. Let's go ahead and get into today's video. Welcome back, Fantasy Fiction Fanatics. It's great to see you again, and I hope you're doing well. Today's class is going to be a little bit of a different class, as I'm sure you can tell by the title. But this class was commissioned from a subscriber of mine, and so I want to give a very big thank you to Christian, who commissioned this particular video. I thank you so very, very much for supporting me and this channel, and I hope that you enjoy my discussion on Dead Witch Walking by Kim Harrison. And thank you so much for giving me the chance to discuss a book that you would like to hear talked about. Okay, so before we go ahead and jump into the main discussion about this book, I just want to go over the trivia question. So last week's answer was Winterfell, and thank you to everyone who participated. We had several right answers, such as Paul, Noobmaster69, Troy, Christian, Release the Kraken Greyjoy, and an honorable, really close, correct answer from Brendan, who answered with Winterfall. So thank you so much to everybody who participated and answered the trivia question. If you would like to also participate in the trivia question, you're welcome to go over to the blog, fantasyfictionfanatics.net. It's going to be on desktop on the right hand side. You'll just have to scroll down just a little bit to see it. If you're on mobile, you'll have to scroll almost all the way down to the bottom in order to find it. So if you'd like to participate and see if you can get this next week's question correct, go ahead and head over there, and you're welcome to answer the question. Okay, so I had several things that Christian would like me to go ahead and discuss about this book. So let's go ahead and just jump right in with first just saying I haven't read this book before this commission, so this was a brand new read for me. Thank you so much for introducing me to a new series, because I really, really enjoyed it. I really liked it and will definitely want to read more books from this series. I was very intrigued by a lot of the things that we're going to go ahead and talk about, and hopefully you guys who have read it will be able to share your thoughts and feelings about this book and this series with me. Okay, so first, let's just go ahead and talk about the base item, which is the setting. So we are set in Cincinnati, and it is an urban fantasy story, so obviously we are set in the real world and in a place that really does exist. Now, Cincinnati is actually a pretty interesting choice in my opinion. I haven't read very many books that are set in that area of the United States. So I think that it was really cool to have a unique location, at least for my reading experience. Maybe there's actually quite a few more books out there that I haven't experienced yet. But I thought that was a really cool choice on the author's part to put it in a lesser known area, at least for me. And because I mean, a lot of books are set in Seattle. That's a very common one. A lot of books are set in Chicago or New York. So I thought it was really interesting to have it be in Cincinnati. The only thing that I wished a little bit more from the setting was that it's had a little bit more details that made me think like, okay, this is something specific to Cincinnati, or made me learn more about the area. But I didn't totally feel like there was anything that stood out to me as like, oh, this would be representative of Cincinnati, or like I have a better idea of what Cincinnati is like from this book. So I do think that it would have been nice to have a little bit more of that, and maybe that does happen in future books of this series. There's a little bit more detail on that. That's very possible. But for anybody else who has read this book and knows more about that area, I'd love to hear anything that I possibly missed or anything that you think is unique to the setting, that would be really, really great. And I did think it was interesting that the main character ends up living in an abandoned church as the main hub for everything that's happening. All the setting comes back to is the home of the church. And in many ways, I felt like that choice was very urban fantasy-like. I'm not sure if saying that is like very clear on what I mean, but it just seems like something that would happen in an urban fantasy. Like if you're reading a regular novel, I don't feel like that would be as likely of a case as having the home be an abandoned church. But it seems like, with how big religion can interact with the supernatural and paranormal stuff can happen with churches for urban fantasies, I just felt like it was a really cool choice, especially with having a vampire being one of the people living in the church, because it's very common trope to have religion be what repels or protects you against vampires. That's part of the lore, and a lot of stories do keep that portion as their weakness, is that they can't be on holy ground or they can't be around crosses or whatever. That is a protection that you can take against a vampire. And it even is in this novel that, as a dead vampire, you are repelled by religion and stuff like that. So I think it's very interesting that, this living vampire is living in an abandoned church. And also that she wears, a cross and some of that. But specifically being in the abandoned church is pretty interesting, in how she has her mail forwarded to that address and everything like that. It's just very interesting and very urban fantasy-like to me. Really felt like we were getting into the supernatural with that setting of the abandoned church. I'd love to know what you guys think of this particular setting and the abandoned church. Any kind of details you can let me know. Anything I missed that you feel like would have been a changer when recognizing it during reading, so that would really appreciate hearing about it. Okay, next let's go ahead and talk about the world itself. So obviously I've only read this one book, and so I don't have a very clear picture of the world as a whole until I read more and I have more information and more understanding about the different things that go on in this world. But I did think that it was a pretty unique version of an urban fantasy setting for having our world being as the setting. A lot of unique lores, a lot of unique creatures in the way that they interact and how they are a part of this society. So one of the things that I thought was super cool, and in many ways, at least for me and what I've read, is it's less common to have the supernatural be part of the world and be known to humans. Some books are like that and some books aren't. I've read more that they're still hidden and nobody really knows about them than I have that are worlds with the supernatural intermixed. So I do always think it's really fun to find a book that shows how the supernatural is intermixed with the world around them. And I thought it was also very interesting that the reason that they came out into to be acknowledged by the humans was because of a virus that had wiped out a lot of the human population. So to me, that's super cool because I haven't seen that as a reason to have the supernatural integrate into society. So really cool, really interesting background as to why the supernatural and the human worlds now are trying to coexist. And that they just can't hide anymore because there's not enough humans to hide their personalities anymore, and they tried to fill in that population gap. So super, super interesting. As well as that, it is the same common kind of trope, is that the supernatural is deemed lesser in the eyes of humans. So that was something that is not as unique. I have seen that in several other urban fantasies that do have the world integrated with regular society, or the supernatural integrated into human society, is that the humans do not like that they are part of the society. They do look down upon them, see them as lesser beings, and have really harsh prejudices. And even the prejudices between one supernatural being and another supernatural being is very present in this book. So I do always think that it's interesting, even though it is something that I have seen quite a bit. It is understandable in the fact that humans are just naturally like to be prejudiced of people, especially beings that could harm us and could be more powerful. It does make sense just with human personality or human nature that's like a protective mechanism. So I do understand that that is a likely scenario to happen. But I do find what even more interesting is that we have such big prejudices shown between two different supernatural beings. So not all of them just get along and are happy and merry, and it's them against the humans. It's really the humans against them, and then in between that there's different thems that are between each other. So I did think all of that kind of politicalness, I guess you can say, all of the prejudices, very interesting to witness, to see how they interact, to learn about them. Especially the pixie fairy one, that is pretty interesting. The one thing that we learn, I feel like, a whole lot about is the vampires. They're the ones of supernatural beings that I feel like we learn the most about in this first novel. And I think that the vampires are pretty interesting. Their lore is different than most vampire lores that I have read in any other supernatural or urban fantasy type books and stories. I think the most interesting thing is the living versus the dead part. So I've read books that have vampires that are living beings and are just, genetically different than humans and can bear children and create more vampires that way. I've also read stories that are their only, non-dead, undead creatures that reproduce or make more vampires through changing a human into a vampire. This one has a mixture of both things, which I have never seen before, is that you can be born as a living vampire and have certain qualities of a vampire and be mostly vampire. But you also have humans' qualities of regular humans. And comes with that being alive and, eating regular food and those kind of things. And then once you die, if you're a living vampire, then you become a full vampire in a way. You become more of a traditional vampire, and you become more of a less rational thinking creature. You become a less emotional. You become more of a dangerous, impersonal type creature. So I think that that's really interesting, that dynamic, and the fact that as a vampire, when you're born, you know that dying is not the end. It is the end of the you that you know, but you will still keep living as this different being with these different personalities. It's also, at least in Ivy's case, it seems to be something to be afraid of or something to not like, because she didn't like how her mother treated her anymore once her mother died and became a dead vampire. As well as the different traits of, how powerful you are if you're living versus dead, as well as if you are a human that was then transformed into a vampire. That is also treated differently, and you are like a subclass of a vampire. So we have both different things. We have the living to dead, and then we've got a human to vampire, like turning into a vampire type scenario. So I think it was just super interesting with all the vampiric lore that was built into this and how unique it is. Kind of taking a little bit here and a little bit here of a lot of different versions that we see in urban fantasy or folklore and mythology. A lot of different traits and a lot of different things being added together to make this story. So I really liked that about this particular novel. And hopefully we'll learn a lot more uniqueness about the other types of beings as well. For example, the Wearers, we didn't learn really anything about them at all. Like, they chased Rachel in one scene, and so we see them and we understand that they are very powerful beings, but we don't actually know anything about them. We don't understand much about what being a were means, or if that literally means werewolf, or if there's other kind of creatures that they can turn into. Or at least I didn't remember anything specifically stating whether that was strictly a werewolf type situation, because they mostly called them weres. So I think that'll be something interesting to find out on and to know more on, as I hopefully will continue to find in the series. And then we also have, that we know of at this point, witches, pixies, fairies, and demons. So I already mentioned already that the pixies and the fairies did have their judgments against each other, and they actually hate each other. I thought that was a very interesting touch as well, something to two types of beings that are considered by a lot of people to be a very similar type of beings, and sometimes pixie and fairy can be a term that people interchange. And I wonder if that is what led to this series making it so they have an animosity toward each other, because they are so considered so similar, and yet they're like, no, I'm not a fairy, and no, I'm not a pixie. And honestly, with Jenks, who is a pixie and hates the fairies so much and does battle with them, and really likes going to battle with them. So I think that was a super interesting dynamic and a cool thing to build upon. Hopefully we will continue to see how that animosity works in the future, and how if we will see any fairies that end up being good guys or not. And then we have a little hint of what a demon is. Now, demons are supposed to not really be around anymore, so it was a very big surprise when, at least for Rachel, to have a demon appear and attack her. And I thought the demon was also another interesting type creature, in the fact that this demon could take any form that it wanted. It could change shape, it could change voice, it could become a different person, it could become animals, it could do basically whatever it wanted, and morphed and changed throughout the whole process, and then took on the attributes or the abilities of whatever being it changed into. So that is super unique, and it makes me wonder exactly what kind of weaknesses these demons have, and how you would end up fighting a demon if they are so powerful and can basically become anything and do anything. Especially in this particular story, once a demon does something for you, you will basically have to return the favor. So, yeah, I felt like that was also another interesting thing. I haven't seen a demon that had quite so much, such a large range of abilities, because they could shapeshift into whatever they want. But it does seem like a fitting lore, or a fitting thing for a demon to be able to do. Especially since these particular demons are not of this world, they're of a different world and must be called with magic. So super, super interesting stuff there. Witches, I felt like, were the most simplistic at this moment. We do know some about what witches can do, especially since Rachel, being our first person narrator, is a witch herself and does magic and all that kind of stuff. She can mix spells and brew spells, which is super interesting, versus, having a wand and reciting an incantation or something like that. So I did think that was interesting. It kind of was like you have to brew a potion in order to have a spell, and attach it to charms and things like that. But I also felt like we didn't see enough of her using magic, and get enough information to truly know exactly all the range of abilities that a witch has in this world. So I'll be very interested in future books to see what more witches can do. We obviously know that there are bad witches, or I wouldn't really say bad, but there's, dark witches that do dark magic, and then there's, the good witch like Rachel is, where she doesn't use any sacrifices or tries to cause pain in order to brew any of her potions. Though she did consider learning one of those, and that's why she went to the library, but she did not dip her finger or her toes into the black magic. She is, at this moment, still just a good witch who does spells that you can find ingredients for naturally. So again, that's going to be something that in the future we would learn more about, and I would find that very interesting to see exactly what kind of limits the witches have and what kind of other kinds of magic and spells that they can do. Now let's go ahead and talk about characters. We actually have quite a few characters that are very prominent in this book. And of course, the first one is going to be Rachel, because she is our main character and is our first person narration. So we are very, very close to Rachel and what her thoughts are, and what her feelings are, and why she's doing what she's doing. So she is the main character and the person you are supposed to be most connected with. She's a very interesting mix of brave, stubborn, and impulsive. So as many main characters can be very stubborn, can be very brave, and also very impulsive. But I feel like she's kind of a unique mix, is that most of it is stubbornness. And then bravery is just kind of there when she needs it. Not that she's would think of herself, I think, as very brave, and she has many vulnerable moments where she is very afraid. But despite having all these incidences that should scare her away, she's stubborn enough to be like, no, I'm gonna go back. So it's not necessarily about bravery, it's more about stubbornness. And she's very impulsive. She even mentions that, she does not for planning, she doesn't like planning, she doesn't want to do planning. She's more of a think of an idea and just run with it and hope that it works out well. And it does work out for her quite a lot, and it also doesn't work out for her sometimes, so it is a little bit of a mix, just as most impulsive things. Sometimes they turn out good and sometimes they turn out bad. It just depends on how it goes. So I think that she's a very interesting character, and I do really like her as our main character. And I think another thing that I find really interesting about her is she is not prejudiced or judgmental, and yet also a bit prejudiced and judgmental. So, for example, with Jenks, she treats him as a pixie and his family really great, and like no other person has ever treated a pixie before. She makes him a full partner because she recognizes how much he does for her and how much he helps her, and what great of a guy he is. So even though at first she kind of thought of him as irritating, as she develops more of a relationship with him, she truly sees his value and how much he does for her and how much she cares about him. So she makes him a full partner. Not only that, she then later gives Jenks and his family the garden that they're living in as theirs to own and do with what they'd like. And giving a pixie property is unheard of, and just really amazes. The partner part first amazes them, and then giving them the garden amazes them as well, even more so, to fully recognize them and to give them the opportunity to do what they want with the garden and to feel free to make any changes, do what they want, and have it be a permanent home for them as long as Jenks is working with Rachel. So in that way, she is definitely not prejudiced or not against anybody for who they are. She really is nice, caring, really cares about the pixies, really likes the pixies that have now been part of her home, basically her roommates, I guess, in a way, because they live in the garden and who have protected her. But on the other hand, we have her other roommate of Ivy, who has, yes, had a little bit of a mix in the fact that she almost drank her blood and that kind of stuff when they first moved in together. But other than that, Ivy treats Rachel really good and really shows that she cares about Rachel and finds Rachel important to her, quits with her, though we don't totally understand why. We don't understand a lot of the whys, but Ivy overall is actually really good to Rachel and didn't purposefully try to suck her blood or anything like that. It wasn't a response that she did uncaringly of what Rachel wanted. But Rachel, even from before they moved in together, has made comments about how much she doesn't trust Ivy, doesn't want to be around Ivy, feels that Ivy makes her uncomfortable, flinches away from her, especially after the incident of almost sucking her blood. Just nothing Ivy does can ever make Rachel trust her, can't make her, accept that she's not somebody to fear. At the end of the novel, we definitely see more of a connection between the two of them, but through most of the book, from beginning to right after everything with Fib, really, where they really more connect, and she's willing to let Ivy in more and be more of contributing more to her efforts of what she's doing. She's constantly flinching away from her, worried about what she's doing, what she's thinking, how she's feeling, if she's being too appealing to Ivy, trusting or not trusting her to be able to hold her instincts, just so wary of her and treating her very much like someone to be feared and like someone who can't be trusted, and it hurts Ivy a lot. And I don't think it is trying to be mean to Ivy, but she definitely can't let whatever it is that she has against Ivy go. She's just too ingrained in her, and I wonder why that is, especially when she doesn't mind who Jenks is, but Ivy bothers her a whole lot, and it doesn't seem like other vampires bother her as much as Ivy does. So I do think that's very, very interesting that she seems to be one way, but with Ivy, she's a completely different way. So, next is Jenks. I think I'm saying that the way it would be pronounced, Jenks, Jenks. And I think he's awesome. For those of you who know that I am a Tasselhoff lover from the Dragonlance series, this probably is not surprising, because in many ways, he's a very similar type of character. He is such a loyal friend, an honorable guy. I don't know about other pixies, since we haven't seen other pixies other than him at this point, but he is totally loyal, totally honorable, totally caring. He really truly cares about Rachel and wants to protect her and to help her. Gets mad when she tells him to not help her and let her escape on her own while he does his reconnaissance, and asks her to never do that for him again because he could not stand that she was in danger. He comes back to save her when she is captured by Trent and finds an opening to be able to help get her to escape. So he's completely 100% honorable. He attacks he fights so many fairies that they come and invade her house, and testing to make sure that people aren't throwing spells at her, all this kind of stuff. Has his whole family basically on bodyguard duty for her. So he's a super great person or being. But his jokes, and part of me thinks he does this on purpose, can be very annoying and very stressful for the characters. I think he purposefully does things to kind of push their buttons, and I think he enjoys that. So despite how great of a partner he is, he does get on their nerves, and they do constantly find him annoying because he makes comments or does things that drive them nuts. So that is kind of, to me, he kind of reminds me a little bit in personality of Tasselhoff. Not quite as extreme, but definitely a similar kind of character, a jokester character, or somebody who purposely likes to make trouble for other people, even if it doesn't totally mean that. I don't think in every case that he realizes it. I think it's just his personality ends up being annoying to the other characters. So I really enjoyed him. I really liked him. I think out of everybody, Jenks was my favorite. Him and his wife Matilda, I thought were excellent characters. So I really enjoyed them. Okay, let's move on to Ivy. So we've discussed a little bit about Rachel's thoughts and feelings about Ivy. Let's go ahead and talk about what we know about Ivy. And the thing about Ivy is that she is still a mystery to be solved. She is not somebody that you come to truly know by the end of this book. And I think that's good. I think that definitely leads to wanting to read more books and find out more about her. But we have a lot of little hints about her that don't add up and are interesting, and the way she interacts and the way Rachel questions her and Nick questions her, is that things don't totally line up with what she's saying or what she's doing, and you don't totally know why. So she's very much a mystery at this point. We don't really know all that much about her. I mean, we know a little bit about her and her family situation, but we don't really know all that much. We don't know anything about her motivations. We don't know anything about what her interest in Rachel is. It does seem like she is an ally, but we don't really totally understand why she's an ally. We don't understand why she quit, why she wants to work with Rachel so bad, why she's so protective of Rachel. We don't really get it. And she doesn't want to tell Rachel. She's very secretive about that matter, and Rachel's trying to figure it out. We have that mention from Nick that it seemed like she moved into the church early, where she already had her mail forwarded there. But it could also be that maybe she didn't totally move in, but she already had the church at the very least ready to go for whenever Rachel quit. She was very quick to quit with Rachel. We don't know what she used the wish from the leprechaun on either. That was something that was a mystery. She just had a token to wish for it later and then wished for it and didn't tell Rachel what it was. So we have a lot of mysteries when it comes to Ivy at this point. She seems like a friend and she seems like a good person, though she does have anger management issues. She gets angry very fast. Not saying that Rachel was a star roommate or star friend, so it is a little understandable, but she definitely does walk away a lot when she gets frustrated. We don't understand anything about why she's quit being a vampire, or if she totally has quit being a vampire. That's up in the air as well. But Jenks trusts her and doesn't seem to have any problems, and trusts Rachel's well-being to her by letting them live together and not, ever kicking up a fuss about it or thinking that Ivy is bad in any way. I think that's all really interesting and adds a lot of dynamic to the story, and it also leads, like I said before, interest for a reader to continue reading, to find out more about Ivy and to truly understand her motivations and what that means for Rachel's future. Next we have Nick. So Nick comes in about halfway or so through the novel, and then becomes pretty prominent in the second half of the novel. And he is another person that's a mystery. He doesn't feel like he's as much of a mystery as Ivy, but he definitely is a mystery. We don't really know all that much about Nick or his motivations either, other than that it seems that he likes Rachel and Rachel seems to like him. Obviously she saved him, at least we think she saved him during the rat races because he had been turned into a rat. And then he just kind of ends up there in their plans. He just kind of just ends up fitting in and going along with it. So he kind of seems like he just stumbled into it. I'm not really 100% convinced if he did or not. Especially since we keep, like with Ivy, we keep getting these hints that something more is going on. He knew about Ivy's mail being forwarded there. He noticed that. He knew things about demons and took a demonology class. He took that demon book and then it was not in Rachel's bag anymore, so obviously he kept it. He made that deal with the demon. I don't know if he totally recognized what he did or not, but it seems like he might know more than he's letting on. He's very intuitive, very much seems like he's got more of a grasp of what's going on, even though, he showed up late to the party and doesn't really know what's going on or shouldn't know what's going on. So it just seems interesting that he's kind of just going with the flow, super happy-go-lucky kind of guy with everything going on, and just kind of fit himself in but definitely seems a little bit like there's more to him than we think. I mean, Rachel is pretty convinced with herself that he's just a normal human that ended up, she ended up helping him out, and so that's how he showed up. But there's hints from both Ivy as well as Rachel's thoughts of things being a little different, or things being a little bit not quite adding up with him. And so I think that will also be something else that is interesting to come. And last but not least, I'd like to talk about Trent, because he's the other really big mystery in this story, and it's a mystery that I am hoping will be returned to, and I'm sure it will, because he is now kind of like Rachel's main enemy, or arch nemesis of a sort. And he's the enemy that she's kind of sub-fighting. I mean, she's really trying to pay off her debt to the IS so she doesn't get killed. But she's going after Trent in order to do that. And it's super interesting because he just somehow always seems to know everything as it's happening. Like, immediately knew that somebody had broken in to his building when she first breaks in. He knows all about her before she shows up the first time she meets him. He seems to know a whole lot about everything that's going on in her life and in other people's lives. Also, can hear people just even breathing in the same room, like things that aren't normal human or abilities, I guess you could say, that make it really interesting. And Jenks can't smell what he is or tell what he is by being close to him, which he can with any other being. He can tell if you're human or if you're vampire, if you've worked magic, that kind of stuff. He can tell all that, but he gets close to Trent and cannot tell who or what he is. So he's a big question mark in that case already. And he just seems like somehow he knows everything, can counteract everything, has no seeming weakness at this point. We just know that he's doing biodrugs and brimstone, which are both illegal and very dangerous operations, as well as having lots of legit operations. We know he's very charismatic, has a lot of employees that seem to love him and just fall all over them, and he's very good at manipulating people. He also has no empathy or anything else like that, and the fact that he'll just kill somebody if he needs them to be killed. Doesn't really have any kind of boundaries. He even manipulates, after he kills somebody, manipulates everyone else to believing that he didn't kill them and it was just a normal event. So he's a very dangerous person. Very dangerous, calculating person. And knows how to manipulate people flawlessly. Rachel, he showed his cards a bit too, especially when he caught her as a mink and held her captive. So she has seen under the lid, so to speak. But I'm going to be interested to see, again, on how Trent develops and if we learn more about him. Obviously, she's protected herself so far against him at this point, but I can't imagine him not coming back. So far, again, he's just a big mystery to me, but I do find him to be interesting. I just find at this point he seems like a very powerful enemy, almost unbeatable kind of thing, the way he just knows everything and can do everything. So I'm going to see how that turns out. For any characters, if you think I missed anything or you thought anything else was really notable about this book, I would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about them down below. Please let me know. I'd be really interested to hear about your thoughts and feelings about them as well. Now, last but not least, I want to go ahead and talk about my comparison between this urban fantasy and other urban fantasies. I do see that there are some similarities between this urban fantasy and other books that I have read, especially the books that have the paranormal aspect of the world integrated into human society and it being out in the open. And that is that there are government agencies that are dedicated to the paranormal aspect of the world. So they have one or more government agencies that are specifically supposed to regulate and control and police the paranormal aspect of the world, which makes complete sense, especially in the world that we have right now, that would be the case. And I think that adds a really realistic aspect to it, to the story, especially with how I think humans would actually react in that situation, and to have that be part of their lives. So I do think that is a good aspect to it, and I think that this particular showing of it, we didn't see enough about the agencies for me to say exactly how I feel about them, other than we know that the IS kills people who don't pay their contract and try and quit. And we know that FIB is another agency that's run more on the human side of things that deal with paranormal aspects. But we don't totally know enough about them in order for me to judge and say whether they're a good agency or exactly how that works with the rest of the story in the previous or in the next set of books. So I do think that is a good aspect to it, though, and it does have those similarities between other stories that are like this. And I also do recognize the similarities of discrimination between the humans and the paranormal beings. So a lot of the other urban fantasies that I have read do have it where the humans don't trust the supernatural people. They don't want to accept them into the society, even, the fact that they're put in the hollows, I believe it is in this one. Other stories have put reservations or specific housing areas for paranormals because they want to be segregated. They want to keep their prejudices. Humans don't think highly of them and are also afraid of them in many cases. And I see that here in this book. And again, I do think that is pretty realistic, especially since the paranormal beings could easily wipe out humanity if they really wanted to. Not saying that they do, and not saying that they don't need the humans, because in many cases that is the case. But the humans do understand that they are the weaker in many cases. So that is what drives that wedge between being able to fully integrate. But I do also see some very unique aspects to this fantasy versus others. I think it's really cool that in this story, Harrison has worked in biodrugs, and the whole virus that wiped out humanity, which brought the supernatural into play and some of that. I do think that is really interesting. I haven't seen a lot of stories that have that portion of common day technology, or maybe not common day, but something that could happen in today's society, and bringing that into the urban fantasy story that they're telling. So I do like that portion of it. I do think that's really interesting and very unique for this particular story. And I also felt like this novel's plot felt unique compared to other urban fantasies that I have read. And I can't 100% tell you this is the uniqueness, or this is why I feel like it's unique. I can't 100% tell. I think I need a little bit more time and maybe reading another book or two to see if I feel the same way, to be able to pinpoint exactly what I think is what makes it unique to me. But I do think part of it is that the events are so back and forth and looped versus it being more of a point A to point B kind of story. So it's not like, just her quitting her IS job and then having them hunt her down and her fighting back against the IS or whatever, and then, getting that problem resolved and having the story end. Instead, we do have her quitting the IS job, and we do have the aspect of her trying to figure out how to pay off her debt so they will stop hunting her. But then we also have this repetitive loop between her and Trent. So she infiltrates Trent's office by just showing up and ended up being let in. And then when that didn't work out, she comes back as a mink to try and break into his office. and gets captured and stays there and has that whole thing until she can escape. And then she goes back again to break in. So it just seems like we have this repetitive loop consistently throughout the story, and I haven't seen that particular type of plot line very much in very many stories. So I feel like that is part of the reason why I think it is so unique. And I do think it is pretty interesting, the little cat and mouse type of story in between the bigger story that's going on right now. Maybe that will come into play later in more books. Maybe it will still be a back and forth between her and Trent. But since I haven't read any more yet, that will be something that I will have to discover in the future. But yeah, I think in like a general sense compared to other urban fantasies, I think that this is a high quality urban fantasy. This to me is not, like a run of the mill type of one. I do think it has enough of the urban fantasy qualities that are good and that are the stable ones, as well as bringing in the uniqueness and bringing in the interesting aspects that are unique to this particular story and makes it engaging. So I think overall it's a very high urban fantasy, and I would definitely recommend it if any of you haven't read it yet to go ahead and check it out. But yeah, I think that those are all my main thoughts about this book, my in-depth thoughts on it. I hope that this was good for everybody, especially you, Christian, who commissioned it. I want to thank you one more time for commissioning it and supporting me and my channel. I would also like to hear your guys' thoughts, to anybody who's read it, on this book and anything that I have mentioned so far. Please go ahead and let me know down below. Or if you want to hear any more aspects about the book that I haven't mentioned, you're welcome to ask. I would love to have a discussion with you about it. So either comment down below, or if that doesn't work for you, you're welcome to reach me on Twitter, which is at fantasyfiction1. You're welcome to check out my Facebook, which is /fantasyfiction1. You're also welcome to contact me and check out my blog, which is fantasyfictionfanatics.net. That has a lot of other content from me, as well as the trivia question as mentioned before, and a lot of way to contact me, and a lot of other content on a lot of other topics for fantasy. So if you're looking for something more or looking for something a little bit different, go ahead and check that out. You're also welcome to contact me as well as your fellow fantasy fanatics on Discord. We are having a lot of fun chatting over there about lots of different stuff. So if you want to go ahead and have a discussion on any of my video topics or any other kind of fantasy things, or just chat with people in general, see what's going on, go ahead and join there. We do have a link down below in the description box. You can click that link and join the server. And you're welcome to reach out to me on there as well, since I am active over there. And I think that's about it. I'll see you guys next time for a regular class, and hope you have a great week. Bye!